Hey guys, tonight we begin with something truly baffling. A place stranger than any castle, jungle or battlefield we have ever wandered into. The average American home of the 1970s. A world drenched in avocado-green, wrapped in fake wood and carpeted in places carpet was never meant to go. Before we step inside, I want to say a genuine thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas are the whole engine of this thing, and honestly, this channel would not exist without people like you, quietly dropping brilliant suggestions in the comments. So if you enjoy these late-night strolls through history, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it is always 2 a.m. somewhere. And if you would rather drift off with just your ears, the channel is now on Spotify as well, with a link waiting in the description for whenever you want it. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, get comfortable, and maybe run your toes through some imaginary shag carpet while you still can. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered why anyone thought a sunken living room was a good idea? Why the refrigerator was the colour of a smoothie nobody ordered? Why there was carpet around the toilet of all the places on this earth? Could you survive an entire evening trapped in a conversation pit with relatives you only sort of liked? Would you last a single dinner party balancing a fondue fork while a lava lamp slowly hypnotized you into silence? And what exactly did the whole house smell like, given that everyone was smoking indoors right next to a wall made of flammable plastic? Well, you are about to find out. Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1974 on a waterbed that is quietly leaking beneath a ceiling that looks like cottage cheese in a house that is somehow browner than you ever remember agreeing to. Good luck. Let's start where all mornings begin, in bed. Except your bed is not really a bed. It is a giant vinyl bag full of lukewarm water, sloshing gently beneath you like a tide that never quite goes out. You did not buy a mattress. You bought a small indoor lake and put a fitted sheet on it. Every time your partner rolls over, you ride a modest domestic wave, and every time you try to sit up, the mattress pushes back like it has opinions. Getting out of bed is less standing and more being politely ejected by physics. And somewhere beneath the wooden frame, a slow leak is turning your carpet into a wetland. Welcome to morning in the 1970s, where even sleeping was an extreme sport. The waterbed did not simply appear out of nowhere. It was sold to you as the future of sleep, a marvel of modern comfort that would cradle your spine and soothe your aching back. The advertisements promised luxury, romance, and a night of rest, unlike anything a boring old mattress could offer. What they did not mention was the ongoing maintenance. Because a waterbed is not a piece of furniture, it is a pet. You have to feed it a special chemical to stop algae from growing inside it, which is a sentence that should give any reasonable person pause. You have to heat it with an electric element underneath, or else you spend the night lying on roughly 200 pounds of cold pond water, slowly surrendering your body heat to the void. And then there is the filling and the draining. Setting up a waterbed means running a garden hose through your bedroom window and standing guard for what feels like several geological ages while it slowly fills. Moving it means the reverse, siphoning all that water back out while praying you do not flood the neighbours below. Miss a step, and you have gone from homeowner to indoor lifeguard in a matter of seconds. Now picture actually trying to rest on it. You lie down, and the water shifts beneath you, redistributing your weight like a suspicious accountant. You settle. Then your partner climbs in, and a wave rolls across the entire surface, gently launching you a few inches into the air before dropping you back down. Every cough, every sneeze, every midnight trip to the bathroom sends ripples across the bed like a stone tossed into a pond. It is basically like trying to sleep on a very patient, very slow-moving ocean that occasionally throws you overboard. Ever tried to make a bed that fights back? Tucking a fitted sheet around a mattress that ripples and slides away from you every time you touch it is a special kind of torture. The sheet pops off one corner, so you fix it, and the motion of fixing it pops off the other three. It is a losing battle, and the waterbed knows it. Some households leaned all the way in and got the deluxe model, complete with a padded wooden frame, mirrored headboard, and little shelves for a lamp and an ashtray. Yes, an ashtray, right there next to a giant bag of water and an electric heater, because safety was more of a suggestion back then. It was less a bed and more a small, sloshing entertainment centre you happened to sleep on. But the day has begun, the water is calm again, and it is time to leave your personal lagoon behind. So you swing your legs over the edge, brace yourself, and prepare to put your bare feet down onto the floor, which, as you're about to discover, is its own kind of adventure. Now that you've wrestled your way off the waterbed, it is time to put your feet down, and oh, what a decision that turns out to be. Beneath you lies the shag carpet, a thick woolly jungle of fibres so long you could lose a small pet in it, and people frequently did. This is not carpet you walk on, it is carpet you wade through. In a fashionable shade of burnt orange or harvest gold, it covers every square inch of floor, holds decades of crumbs hostage, and comes with its own special rake. Yes, a rake, for grooming your floor like a tiny lawn. Somewhere deep in those fibres is a coin you dropped in 1972. You will never see it again. Let us talk about the texture, because it is genuinely something. Real shag carpet had strands that could reach 2, 3, sometimes 4 inches long, standing up in dense, deep piles that swallowed your feet whole. Walking across it barefoot felt like trudging through warm grass that had never once been washed. Your toes disappeared, your ankles disappeared, and with them disappeared any hope of ever finding whatever you dropped. Because the carpet was not a surface, it was a filing system that never gave anything back. The colours were a decision too. This was not the era of tasteful beige. This was carpet in avocado-green, in rusty orange, in gold, in a brown so deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. Some brave souls chose multiple colours at once, a swirling mixture of tones meant to hide dirt, which it did brilliantly, because you could not see anything down there at all. That was not a flaw. That was the entire strategy. And here is the part that modern minds struggle with. This carpet needed to be raked. A regular vacuum could not defeat the mighty shag, so households owned a special rake, a wide plastic comb dragged across the floor to lift the flattened fibres back up and make them stand tall and fluffy again. You raked your floor like a Zen garden. You groomed it. It was a chore that sounds made up, and yet millions of people did it every single week without questioning a single thing about their lives. Now imagine cleaning it after an accident. You spill a drink on hardwood, you wipe it up. You spill a drink on shag carpet and it is gone, vanished into the depths, seeping down to the very roots where no cloth can reach. The stain does not disappear, it simply relocates to a place beyond human understanding. Dropping a single pea in this carpet was basically a burial at sea. The shag also had a talent for holding on to smells the way a sponge holds water. Cigarette smoke, pet accidents, the ghost of last night's fondue, all of it settled deep into the fibres and stayed there for years, quietly composting. The carpet didn't just cover your floor. It archived your entire household, one questionable odour at a time. Ever tried to find a dropped earring in a shag carpet? It is like searching for a specific blade of grass in a field, in the dark, wearing mittens. You get down on your hands and knees, you comb through with your fingers, and you emerge 15 minutes later with 3 old buttons, a marble, and a profound sense of defeat. So you stand there, feet buried, having accepted that the floor owns anything it touches, and you lift your eyes from the carpet to the walls, seeking something solid, something honest, something real, which is a mistake, because the walls, as you're about to learn, are lying to you. Once your eyes adjust to the gloom, you begin to notice the walls, and the walls are made of wood, or rather, they are made of something pretending very hard to be wood. Every surface in the house is covered in thin sheets of dark faux timber panelling, giving each room the cosy atmosphere of a hunting lodge, a submarine, or the office of a man who's about to deliver bad news. It does not matter that no tree on earth is actually that colour. It does not matter that it makes the room darker than the inside of a walnut. Wood panelling is everywhere, and it is here to stay, mostly because peeling it off would take a crowbar and a small prayer. The genius of the panelling, if we can call it that, was in the deception. These were not solid wood planks. They were large, flimsy sheets of pressed fiberboard with a photograph of wood grain printed on top and coated in a shiny finish. Look closely, and you would notice the exact same knot, the exact same swirl of grain repeating across the wall every 16 inches, like a wallpaper that was too embarrassed to admit what it was. It was wood the way a cardboard cutout is a celebrity. Installing it was gloriously easy, which is exactly why it spread across the nation like a stain. You did not need to be a craftsman. You bought the panels, you glued or nailed them straight over your existing walls, cracks, holes, ugly plaster and all, and suddenly your room looked like the study of a wealthy sea captain. It was the home improvement equivalent of throwing a blanket over a mess and calling it decorating. The colour was the real commitment, though. This panelling came in shades of brown that ranged from dark to darker to please turn on a light. A room fully wrapped in it absorbed sunlight like a black hole, which meant that even at high noon your living room had the ambience of a cave with a television in it. Reading a book in there required either excellent eyes or a lamp positioned directly against your face. It paired, of course, with everything else the decade loved. Wood panelling below, popcorn ceiling above, shag carpet underfoot, and you were fully sealed inside a warm brown box, insulated from both the outside world and good taste. Some homes had panelling in every single room, including the bathroom and the kitchen, which meant you could go from a lodge to lodge to lodge to a slightly smaller lodge without ever seeing a real wall. The problem naturally came later. Because panelling was glued and nailed directly over the original walls, tearing it out decades afterward became a project of biblical suffering. Behind those cheerful fake planks lurked damaged plaster, ancient adhesive, and the crushed dreams of anyone who bought the house hoping for a quick renovation. Removing it was like unwrapping a mummy, except the mummy was your dining room and it did not want to let go. Ever tried to hang a picture on a wall that is secretly hollow? You tap it, and it sounds less like a home and more like a drum. Nails go in too easily, then wobble loose. The whole surface flexes when you lean on it. It was less a wall and more a very committed suggestion of a wall, and yet, standing there in your dim brown lodge, there is a certain warmth to it, a cosy wrapped-up feeling, like living inside a very large piece of furniture. You look up to admire the finishing touch on this timber cocoon, and that is when you meet the ceiling. The ceiling, as it happens, has some texture issues of its own. Look up, if you dare. There, hovering over your head like a low-hanging storm cloud, is the ceiling, and it is covered in a bumpy, crumbly, oddly moist-looking texture that everyone has agreed to call popcorn. Nobody knows precisely why the ceiling needed to look like the inside of a cave, but there it is, catching dust, casting strange little shadows, and occasionally shedding flakes onto the furniture below. It was cheap, it hid imperfections, and it was almost impossible to clean. It also, in a plot twist nobody appreciated at the time, sometimes contained asbestos. So really, The ceiling was not just ugly, it was quietly plotting against you. The technical name was acoustic ceiling, and there was a shred of logic buried in the madness. The bumpy texture was supposed to help absorb sound, softening the echo in a room. Whether it actually worked is debate for people with more patience than us, but the real appeal was far less noble. It was fast, and it was forgiving. A builder could spray this stuff onto a ceiling in minutes and instantly hide every crack, seam and lazy patch job above your head. It was the ultimate cover-up, applied with a hose, and what a texture it was. Sprayed on wet, it dried into thousands of tiny stalactites, a rough, pointed landscape of little peaks and valleys that resembled cottage cheese that had been startled. In the right light, it looked like the surface of an alien moon. In the wrong light, which was most light, it just looked like the ceiling had a skin condition. The trouble began the moment you needed to do anything to it. You could not wash it, because water made the texture crumble and fall. You could not paint it easily, because the rough surface drank paint like a sponge and shed little flakes with every stroke of the roller. And heaven help you if you bumped it with a broom handle or a tall piece of furniture, because a chunk of your ceiling would simply detach and float gently down into your dinner. Then there was the dust. Every one of those thousands of little peaks was a perfect perch for dust, cobwebs and grime, and there was no practical way to clean it. Over the years it greyed, it yellowed from the cigarette smoke drifting up from below, and it slowly transformed from off-white to a colour best described as regret. You could not fix it. You could only look at it and quietly make peace with your ceiling. And now for the twist that turned a mildly annoying decorating choice into a genuine problem. For a good stretch of these years, the material sprayed onto ceilings often contained asbestos, prized for being fireproof and durable. Nobody thought much of it at the time, but it meant that decades later, that innocent-looking popcorn ceiling became something you could not simply scrape off in an afternoon. Disturbing it could release fibres you very much did not want to breathe, turning a weekend project into a hazardous clean-up operation. The ceiling had been quietly menacing you the entire time, and you had no idea. Ever tried to change a light fixture while standing directly beneath a ceiling that rains crumbs on your face the moment you touch it? It is a humbling experience. You reach up, the ceiling flakes onto your glasses, and you slowly begin to understand why people just left it alone for 30 years. So you lower your gaze from the crumbling heavens above, blinking dust out of your eyes, and you turn to the walls once more, hoping for calm. But calm is not on the menu, because at least one wall in this house is wearing a pattern so loud it can practically be heard. If the panelling did not get every wall, do not worry, because the wallpaper certainly finished the job. Somewhere in this house is a room wrapped floor to ceiling in a pattern so aggressive it could give you a headache from across the street. Enormous psychedelic flowers, swirling geometric shapes, foil accents that shimmer under the light, all repeating endlessly like a wall that is slowly having a breakdown. The bolder the print, the better, and nobody stopped to ask whether living inside a kaleidoscope might affect the human nervous system. You cannot look directly at the bathroom wallpaper for too long. It is not decorative, it is a challenge. The 1970s did not believe in a quiet wall. A blank white wall was seen as a wasted opportunity, a canvas begging to be covered in the most eye-watering pattern available. So designers obliged, unleashing wallpaper that featured flowers the size of dinner plates, orange and brown paisley swirls, and geometric grids that seemed to pulse if you stared at them long enough. Standing in one of these rooms was less like being in a home and more like being politely trapped inside a lava lamp. Colour was applied with total confidence and zero restraint. Harvest gold met avocado-green met burnt orange, often on the very same roll, clashing and blending into a warm chaos that somehow the whole family got used to. There were metallic wallpapers with silver and gold foil that reflected the light and made the room shimmer like the inside of a candy wrapper. There was flocked wallpaper with a raised fuzzy velvet texture you could pet, if you were the kind of person who pets walls. The truly ambitious homeowner did not stop at one wall. They wrapped the entire room, then added a matching border, and in moments of pure daring papered the ceiling too. Imagine lying in bed and looking up to find the same giant orange flowers blooming above you that surround you on all four sides. It was total immersion. There was no escape. You did not decorate the room, you were absorbed by it. Some of the patterns had a genuine hypnotic quality. Bold, repeating shapes, sharp, contrasting colours, the endless march of the same design across every surface. In the kitchen, it might be cheerful mushrooms or rows of cartoon fruit. In the bathroom, it might be a swirling floral so intense you would forget what you came in there to do. The wallpaper was not there to fade politely into the background. It wanted to be seen, and it would not be ignored. Hanging it was its own special ordeal, involving buckets of paste, long, soggy strips of paper, and a great deal of shouting between two people trying to line up a pattern that refused to cooperate. Get one strip slightly crooked and the entire wall drifted off at an angle, the flowers marching diagonally toward the corner like they were trying to escape. And removing it later was a nightmare of steam, scrapers and stubborn glue that clung to the wall like it had signed a lifetime lease. Ever tried to relax in a room where the walls seemed to be vibrating? You sit down, you take a breath, and out of the corner of your eye a giant paisley swirl appears to shift and ripple. You look again, and it is still. Probably. This was the everyday reality of a decade that considered a calm wall a personal failure. So you back slowly out of the psychedelic room, eyes slightly crossed, and you go looking for something soothing, some gentle neutral tone to rest your senses. And this is where you learn the truth about the colour scheme of the entire house, which is that it was chosen apparently from a menu. Let's talk about colour, because the 1970s had opinions, and those opinions were mostly brown. Everywhere you look, you're surrounded by the official shades of the decade. Avocado-green, harvest gold, burnt orange, and a deep muddy brown that can only be described as gravy. These are not accent colours. These are the whole house. Your couch is orange, your walls are gold, your appliances are green, and it all blends together into a warm, murky stew of a home that feels less like a room and more like the inside of a casserole. Somewhere a designer decided that houses should be the colour of food, and everyone just nodded along. These colours even had names, official ones, printed proudly on paint cans and appliance brochures. Avocado, harvest gold, copper tone, burnt sienna, autumn haze. They read less like a colour palette, and more like the menu at a very earnest health food restaurant. And people did not choose just one. They chose several, layering them throughout the home until the whole place looked like it had been decorated by a very confident bowl of minestrone. The strange thing is how deeply committed everyone was. This was not one accent wall or a single bold throw pillow. The refrigerator was green, the carpet was gold, the couch was orange, the curtains were brown with an orange floral print, and the lampshade tied it all together by being green again. Standing in the middle of it, you were surrounded on all sides by warm, earthy tones closing in like a cosy, slightly overwhelming hug from a very autumnal relative. There was a reasoning behind it, believe it or not. After the bright, sharp colours of the previous decade, the 1970s swung hard toward nature, toward earthy, organic, grounded tones meant to evoke the forest floor and the harvest field. It was supposed to feel warm, natural, and calming. The intention was good. The execution was a living room that looked like it had been marinated. The colours also had a talent for aging poorly and yet somehow never leaving. Harvest gold appliances, once the height of fashion, slowly became the mark of a kitchen frozen in time, the sort of thing that made future buyers wince. But those appliances refused to die. Built like bunkers and coloured like squash, they hummed along for decades, forcing generation after generation to live inside a colour scheme they did not choose and could not afford to replace. And everything matched, which was the point and also the problem. When your walls, floor, furniture and appliances are all variations on the same warm mud, the room loses all its edges. Where does the couch end and the carpet begin? Who can say? It was camouflage for furniture. Drop a brown remote onto a brown couch on top of a brown carpet, and you might as well have thrown it into another dimension. Ever tried to find your keys in a room where every single object is the same shade of gold? Your keys are gold. The table is gold. The bowl the keys are sitting in is gold. You're essentially playing a very frustrating game of hide and seek against a colour, and the colour always wins. So you stand there, gently absorbed into the warm brown soup of your surroundings, and nature calls. You need the bathroom. Surely, you think, the bathroom will be a normal, sensible, water-friendly room. Surely no one would do anything truly strange in there. Oh, you sweet, optimistic time traveller, you have not seen the carpet yet. It is time to freshen up, so you shuffle toward the bathroom, and here is where things get genuinely unhinged. Because in the 1970s, someone looked at the one room in the house dedicated to water and moisture and thought, you know what this needs? Carpet. Soft, fuzzy, wall-to-wall carpet, wrapped lovingly around the base of the toilet like a fleecy little scarf. There is a carpeted lid cover. There is a matching carpeted mat. And all of it is quietly absorbing everything you do not want to think about. It felt warm on your feet, which was nice, right up until the moment you remembered what a bathroom is actually for. Let us sit with the concept for a moment, because it deserves our full attention. The bathroom is, by definition, the wettest room in the entire house. It contains a sink, a tub, a shower and a toilet, all of them actively producing splashes, drips and steam at all hours. And into this humid little chamber, the decade decided to install a soft, absorbent, fuzzy material that soaks up moisture and never fully dries. It is the interior design equivalent of building a boat out of sponge. The carpet came as a match set too. There was the large piece covering the floor, then a fitted cover that wrapped around the base of the toilet in a snug little collar, then a lid cover, and often a soft cosy sleeve for the tank as well. Your toilet was essentially wearing a fuzzy sweater. It was, they insisted, warmer and more comfortable, which was true in the narrow sense that stepping onto warm carpet is nicer than stepping onto cold tile. Everything else about it was a slow-motion disaster. Because here is the thing about carpet near a toilet and a tub. It gets wet. It gets wet constantly, from splashes, from steam, from drips, from the general chaos of human beings using a bathroom. And unlike tile, it does not wipe clean. It absorbs, it holds, and it stays damp in a way that would make a swamp jealous. Over time, it developed a rich and complicated relationship with mildew, and a smell that no amount of air freshener could fully negotiate with. Cleaning it was a lost cause from the start. You could not mop it. You could not wipe it. You could scrub at it, spray it, and vacuum it. But the moisture and everything the moisture carried had already sunk down into the backing where no cleaning product could follow. The carpet did not get clean. It just got a fresh coat of lemon scent laid over the top of whatever was happening underneath. And yet people loved it, at least at first. It matched the wallpaper, it matched the towels, it matched the little fuzzy cover on the tissue box, and it made the bathroom feel soft and coordinated and cosy. Every surface in the room could be part of the same pastel or earth-toned dream, from the walls to the floor to the seat you sat on. It was décor taken to its most enthusiastic and least practical conclusion. Ever tried to towel off after a shower while standing on carpet that is somehow already damp? You step out clean. You step onto a fuzzy surface holding onto the moisture of 1,000 previous showers, and you feel a small chill of doubt about every decision that led you here. It is a uniquely unsettling way to start a clean day on an unclean floor. So you finish your business as quickly as dignity allows, and you retreat from the fuzzy swamp back toward the kitchen for breakfast. And there, gleaming at you in a shade of green not found in nature, waits the appliance that will define the entire decade. You wander into the kitchen for breakfast and are immediately greeted by the refrigerator, standing proud in a shade of avocado green so bold it practically hums. Beside it, the stove matches, and so does the dishwasher, because in this decade appliances came in flavours rather than colours. If green was not your thing, you could choose harvest gold or a cheerful shade of copper tone brown, but you could not choose white, because white was for cowards. These machines were built like tanks and coloured like vegetables, and they would outlive you, your marriage, and possibly the house itself, all while glowing gently in the shade of a smoothie no one asked for. The colour really was the whole personality. Manufacturers competed to offer the trendiest shades, and the avocado green became so wildly popular that entire kitchens were built around it, tile and counters and curtains all bending the knee to a single dominant vegetable tone. When avocado started to feel tired, harvest gold rose to take its place, a mustardy yellow that looked warm and inviting for approximately 2 years before it began to look like a stain. And for those who wanted something a little more grounded, there was copper tone, a brown so committed it could have its own zip code. And these appliances were enormous, heavy, and built to survive a direct hit. The refrigerator alone weighed about as much as a small pony, and had rounded corners, a chunky chrome handle, and a hum that became the background music of the household. It did not have an ice maker that talked to you or a screen on the door. It had one job, keeping food cold, and it did that job with the grim, unstoppable determination of a machine that fully intended to outlive its owners. That durability was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, these things simply did not break. On the other hand, that meant your bright green refrigerator was not going anywhere. Ever. No matter how badly the fashion aged around it. Long after avocado green had gone from cutting edge to punchline, the fridge kept humming along in the corner, a proud, glowing monument to a decision made years ago that could not be undone without significant expense. The whole kitchen fell in line behind it. The stove matched, with its heavy metal burners and a broiler that could summon the heat of 1,000 suns. The dishwasher matched, rolling out from under the counter on tiny wheels. Even the smaller items joined the theme, the toaster, the blender, the canister set on the counter, all of them enlisted into the great avocado army, until the entire room was one coordinated shade of vegetable. There was a certain honesty to it, at least. The 1970s kitchen did not pretend to be sleek or minimal or hidden. It was loud, it was colourful, and it was proud of every heavy, humming, deeply green inch of itself. This was a kitchen that had made a choice and was going to stand by that choice, with the stubbornness of a machine that refused to die. Ever tried to convince yourself that a green refrigerator looks normal simply because you see it every day? That is the quiet magic of the decade. Live with something long enough and the strangest colour in the world becomes just the colour of the fridge, unremarkable, invisible, humming softly in the corner of your life. So you open that heavy green door, the light flickers on, and you reach inside for breakfast, resting your hand on a countertop that is about to reveal its own peculiar secret. Because in this kitchen, even the counter is not quite what it claims to be. Now, run your hand along the kitchen counter, that smooth, slightly sticky expanse of formica, in a swirling pattern designed to look like real stone. If real stone came in gold flecks and boomerang shapes. The floor beneath you is linoleum, printed to resemble tile, brick, or occasionally nothing found in nature. Everything in this kitchen is pretending to be something it is not, and doing so proudly. It is easy to wipe down, impossible to destroy, and completely immune to good taste. The whole room is a monument to the great 1970s philosophy. Why use a real material when a plastic imitation could last forever and quietly outlast civilization? Formica was the star of this show, a hard laminate surface glued over a wooden core printed with any pattern the imagination could produce. And the imagination produced some choices. There were counters flecked with gold to look like fancy stone, counters with little repeating boomerang shapes, counters in solid harvest gold, and counters covered in a busy speckled pattern that hid crumbs so well you were never entirely sure the counter was clean. It was practical, it was cheerful, and it looked like almost nothing occurring in nature. The beauty of Formica, from a purely practical standpoint, was that it simply did not care. Spill something on it, wipe it up, done. Set down a hot pan and, all right, maybe do not do that, because it would leave a mark, but short of open flame the stuff was nearly indestructible. It shrugged off scratches, stains, and the daily abuse of a busy family kitchen without complaint. It was the honey badger of countertops. Underfoot the linoleum carried the same spirit into the floor. Here was a smooth, springy sheet material printed to imitate whatever was fashionable. Tiles that were not tiles, bricks that were not bricks, patterns that suggested stone laid by someone who had only ever heard stone described second-hand. It came in big rolls, got glued down over the subfloor, and provided a surface you could mop in about 4 minutes flat. No grout, no gaps, no fuss. The theme, as you have surely noticed by now, was fakery, but cheerful, unapologetic fakery. This was not a home embarrassed about its imitation surfaces. This was a home that had looked at real stone and real tile, considered the cost and the maintenance, and said, "No thank you. I will take the plastic version that wipes clean and lasts forever." There was something almost admirable about the practicality of it, buried under all those gold flecks. And it did last forever, which was the whole point and also the eventual problem. Just like the panelling and the green refrigerator, these surfaces refused to age out gracefully. That gold-flecked counter installed with pride would still be sitting there decades later, faded but unbroken, defeating every attempt at modernization simply by refusing to wear out. You could not justify replacing something that still worked perfectly, even if it made your kitchen look like a time capsule. Ever tried to figure out whether a countertop is actually clean when its entire pattern is designed to disguise dirt? You wipe it, you squint at it, you run your hand across it, and you simply have to trust that the swirling gold speckles are hiding a clean surface and not a small civilization of crumbs. It is a leap of faith performed several times a day. So you finish making your breakfast on your faux stone counter, standing on your faux tile floor, and the telephone rings, which means it is time for a short journey, because your phone, unlike everything else in this modern kitchen, is going absolutely nowhere. The phone rings, and here begins a small physical journey, because your telephone lives on the kitchen wall and it is going nowhere. It is a rotary model in a colour that clashes bravely with everything around it, and answering it means walking to it, standing there, and staying there. The cord stretches, tangles, and knots itself into a spiral so tight it could double as a spring. To dial a single number, you must drag the wheel around and wait for it to click slowly back, once per digit, which means calling anyone is a genuine commitment. There is no caller identification. You answer every call blind, like a very anxious game show contestant. The rotary dial was a marvel of patience training. To make a call, you placed your finger in the little hole above the number you wanted, dragged the dial all the way around to the metal stopper, and then let go, waiting as the wheel slowly clicked its way back to the start before you could dial the next digit. A single phone number took ages, and if you were dialing a number full of 9s and 8s, the high numbers with the longest travel, you had time to reconsider the entire conversation before you even finished dialing. Then there was the cord, that legendary coiled tether that connected the handset to the base on the wall. In theory, it stretched, letting you wander a few feet while you talked. In practice, it tangled itself into a hopeless knot within days, a tightly wound spiral that grew shorter and more chaotic every time you used it. You would spend half of every phone call absent-mindedly trying to untwist the cord, which of course only made it worse, until the handset hung at an angle from a coil the size of a fist. Location was everything, because the phone was mounted to the wall, usually in the kitchen, and that spot was where all phone calls happened. Forever. There was no taking the call to your bedroom, no wandering out to the porch, no privacy of any kind. You stood in the kitchen, tethered to the wall by your ear, while your entire family walked past and listened to your half of the conversation. Teenagers stretched the cord to its absolute breaking point, trying to reach around the corner for a shred of privacy, whispering into the receiver while their little brother pretended not to eavesdrop. And every call was a total mystery when it began. The phone rang, and you had no earthly idea who was on the other end. It could be your mother, your boss, a wrong number, or a stranger trying to sell you something. There was no little screen announcing the caller. You simply picked up, said hello, and braced yourself for whatever the universe had decided to send down the line. Answering the phone was an act of pure, blind courage. There was a strange charm to it too, though. The phone was a shared household object, not a personal one. It rang for the whole family. It was answered by whoever was closest, and messages were passed along by shouting up the stairs or scribbling a note on a pad. The phone was a gathering point, an event, a thing that happened to the household rather than a thing that lived in your pocket. Ever tried to end an awkward call when you cannot simply walk away because you are physically attached to the wall? You shift your weight, you fiddle with the tangled cord, you say goodbye 4 or 5 times, and still you stand there, anchored, until someone finally hangs up. It was a special kind of trapped that the modern world has thankfully forgotten. So you finally free yourself from the tangled cord, hang the heavy handset back on its cradle, and turn your attention to something warm and nourishing to start the day. And in this kitchen full of powders and boxes, breakfast, as it turns out, is a small miracle of modern science. With the phone conquered, it is time to eat. And breakfast in this house is a triumph of chemistry over food. You pour a glass of tang, a powdered orange substance that astronauts drank and that tastes like citrus was described to someone over the telephone. Perhaps you have a bowl of cereal so brightly coloured it turns the milk a suspicious shade of pink. Everything comes from a box, a pouch, or a can, and everything promises to be instant, easy, and vaguely space-age. Nutrition was not the goal. Convenience was the goal, and if it also glowed faintly under the kitchen lights, well, that was just a bonus. Tang deserves its own moment of respect, or something like respect. It was a powder. You spooned it into a glass, added water, stirred, and produced something orange that had met an orange exactly once, briefly, at a party. It was marketed with the glamour of the space program because astronauts drank it in orbit, which meant that every child gulping it down at the kitchen table felt like they were preparing for a mission to the moon rather than a morning at school. It was sweet, it was tangy, and it was about as related to fruit as a traffic cone. The cereal was where the decade really let its imagination run free. Boxes lined the shelves in colours that do not occur in nature, promising sugar, cartoon mascots, and a free prize buried somewhere inside. The cereal itself came in shapes and shades that seemed designed in a laboratory by someone who'd been told what breakfast was but had never actually seen it. And the true magic revealed itself in the bowl, when the milk slowly turned pink or green, or a murky brown, transformed by the sheer chemical enthusiasm of what you were eating. You did not just eat breakfast. You conducted an experiment and then drank the results. Convenience was the reigning god of the morning. instant coffee made from crystals that dissolved into hot water and produced a beverage that was technically coffee in the way that a photograph is technically a person. Instant oatmeal in little paper packets. Toaster pastries that leapt from the toaster with a filling hot enough to weld metal, wrapped in frosting and ready to injure the roof of your mouth. Everything was fast, everything was processed, and everything came wrapped in cheerful packaging promising to save you precious time. There was a genuine optimism baked into all of it, if you will forgive the expression. This was the future arriving in the kitchen. Why squeeze an orange when science had bottled the essence of orange into a convenient powder? Why cook a slow breakfast when a machine could pop a warm pastry out for you in 90 seconds? The whole morning was a celebration of modern living, of chemistry conquering the tedious old business of preparing actual food. Of course, the nutritional value of all this was somewhere between questionable and hilarious. The average 1970s breakfast contained enough sugar to power a small child clear through until lunch, and possibly through a wall. But nobody was counting. Breakfast was fun, it was fast, it was brightly coloured, and it came from a box with a cartoon on the front, which was frankly all the endorsement anyone needed. Ever tried to feel healthy while drinking a glowing orange beverage that was invented for space travel? You cannot. You simply accept that this is breakfast now, and that somewhere an astronaut is drinking the exact same thing, which makes it feel a little more dignified than it probably deserves. So you finish your space-age breakfast, brush the neon crumbs from your shirt, and wander into the living room, where the true centerpiece of the household waits. It is enormous, it is wooden, and it is technically a television. You drift into the living room and there it sits, dominating the space like a shrine. The television. This is not a screen you hang on a wall. This is a massive wooden cabinet the size of a chest freezer, with a modest little picture tube tucked into the centre and speakers built into the sides. It weighs as much as a small horse. It has fewer channels than you have fingers, and changing them means physically getting up and turning a heavy dial with a satisfying clunk. When it is off, it works as a shelf. When it is on, the whole family gathers around it, because in this house the television is not an appliance, it is an heirloom. The word console is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, and so were the people who had to move it. This was not a television so much as a large piece of furniture that happened to contain a television. It sat directly on the floor on stubby little legs, encased in a wooden cabinet finished to match the panelling. Sometimes with sliding doors you could close to hide the screen entirely, as if the television were a shameful secret rather than the beating heart of the room. The actual picture was surprisingly small, a modest glowing rectangle set into a vast expanse of wood. Changing the channel was a full physical event. There was no remote, or if there was, it was a heavy clicker with about 3 buttons that half worked. So you got up, you walked to the set, and you turned a chunky dial that went clunk, clunk, clunk through the channels, of which there were only a handful, and there were 2 dials, one for the main channels and one for the higher ones, which meant a small ceremony of turning and adjusting just to find something to watch. The youngest child in the household was frequently drafted as the human remote control sent back and forth to the set on command. The picture itself required patience and faith. The television took a moment to warm up when you switched it on, the image slowly blooming out of a small bright dot in the centre of the screen. Reception depended on the antenna, a pair of metal rods on top known affectionately as rabbit ears, which you adjusted endlessly, bending and twisting them while a family member shouted whether the picture was getting better or worse. Sometimes the best reception was achieved only while you personally stood there holding the antenna, at which point you became furniture, and the colour, for those lucky enough to have a colour set, was a gloriously unreliable thing. Faces came out slightly green, or orange, or an alarming shade of purple, and you tuned the colour dial by feel, chasing a natural skin tone that always seemed just out of reach. When it worked, it was magic. When it did not, Everyone on screen looked mildly unwell, and you simply got used to a world where the news anchor was faintly tangerine. But when the picture came in clear, the whole family gathered. This one television, this heavy wooden altar, was the centre of the household in the evenings. Everyone watched the same programmes at the same time because there was no other option, and that shared experience made the console television more than a machine. It was the campfire the family gathered around. Ever tried to move a piece of furniture that weighs as much as a refrigerator just to clean behind it? You do not. You simply accept that the dust behind the television is now permanent, an untouchable archive that will remain until the set finally dies, which being built like a bunker may be never. So you settle in front of the great wooden beast, and beside it you notice its noisier companion, an even larger cabinet bristling with knobs, dials, and mysterious blinking lights. Beside the television stands its noisy cousin, the entertainment centre, a sprawling wooden fortress of knobs, dials, and blinking lights dedicated entirely to sound. There's a turntable under a smoky plastic lid, a reel-to-reel, or an 8-track player, and speakers the size of nightstands that could rattle the windows if you were feeling brave. Operating it requires the confidence of an airline pilot, since there are more switches here than in an actual cockpit. This was the beating heart of the home, the place where records spun and volume knobs turned, and where at least one family argument began with the words, "Do not touch my equipment." The proper name was the hi-fi, short for high fidelity, and the whole point was that it made music sound better than anything before it. This was serious business. A good stereo system was a source of enormous pride, a status symbol displayed as prominently as any painting, and its owner treated it with the reverence others reserved for religious objects. You did not casually use the stereo. You operated it carefully, with clean hands and a respectful attitude. At its centre sat the turntable, where vinyl records spun beneath a delicate needle. Playing a record was a small ritual. You slid the black disc from its sleeve, holding it by the edges so as not to smudge it, set it gently on the platter, and lowered the needle onto the groove with the steady hand of a surgeon. One slip, one scratch, and the record was scarred forever, doomed to skip in the same spot for all eternity. The whole process demanded care, and it made listening to music feel like an event rather than background noise. Then there was the 8-track, that chunky plastic cartridge you shoved into a slot with a satisfying thunk. It played continuously, looping around, which was convenient right up until it decided to switch tracks in the middle of your favourite song, cutting away with a loud clunk to finish the tune later. Nobody quite forgave the 8-track for this, and yet everyone owned a stack of them, rattling around in a shoebox or wedged into a rack beside the couch. The speakers were the real showstoppers, enormous wooden boxes the size of small refrigerators, capable of filling the entire house with sound and gently vibrating the popcorn ceiling. Positioning them correctly was a science, and turning them up too loud was a family crisis. A truly dedicated audiophile would sit in a specific chair, in a specific spot, precisely between the two speakers, and listen with their eyes closed, hearing details that no one else in the room could detect or particularly cared about. And the controls. Oh, the controls. A proper receiver had a bewildering array of knobs, sliders and switches for volume, balance, bass, treble, and a dozen mysterious functions that most owners never fully understood. There were little glowing meters that bounced along with the music, dials that lit up, and buttons that did things nobody could quite explain. It looked less like a music player and more like the control panel of a spacecraft, and operating it correctly was a point of genuine pride. Ever tried to touch someone else's carefully calibrated stereo system and watch their face fill with quiet horror? These machines had owners, not users, and those owners guarded their equipment jealously. adjusting the bass knob without permission was a genuine household offence, so you leave the great wall of sound humming softly and you turn toward the living room proper, where the floor itself does something unexpected. It drops away beneath you into a sunken little pit lined with cushions. Here we arrive at perhaps the strangest feature of them all, the conversation pit, a section of the living room floor that has simply been dropped several steps lower than everything else. You descend into it as if entering a shallow indoor swimming pool, except instead of water it is filled with cushions and low couches arranged in a cosy little square. The idea was intimacy, forcing everyone to sit close and talk. The reality was a decorative trap that people tripped into, could not easily climb out of, and quietly dreaded during parties. It was sunken, it was carpeted, and it was, above all else, extremely difficult to leave gracefully once you were down there. The concept, on paper, sounded almost romantic. Rather than scattering furniture around the edges of a room, you carved out a lower level in the centre, ringed it with built-in seating, and created a cosy, intimate den where everyone faced one another. No televisions, no distractions, just people gathered together at a lower elevation, having the deep and meaningful conversations that the pit had been engineered to produce. It was architecture with a social agenda. Descending into it was the first small adventure. There were usually 2 or 3 steps down, unmarked and blending into the carpet, which meant that anyone unfamiliar with the layout was at real risk of walking straight off the edge. Guests would drift across the living room mid-conversation and suddenly discover the floor was gone, performing an ungraceful little stumble into the seating below. The conversation pit was, if nothing else, extremely good at starting conversations, usually the one that began with, "Are you all right?" Once you were down there, you were committed. The pit was a comfortable, cushioned bowl, and it did indeed encourage people to sit close and talk. But it also meant that leaving required a whole production, hauling yourself up out of the low seating and climbing back up the steps, all while trying to look casual. Slipping out early to use the bathroom or refill a drink became a public event. There was no discreet exit from a hole in the floor. The pit also created a fascinating social hierarchy. Everyone was seated below the level of the rest of the room, which meant that anyone standing at the edge loomed over the group like a giant. It made ordinary interactions slightly strange, with people down in the pit craning their necks up at whoever had wandered over to lean on the railing. It was cosy and awkward in equal measure, which is a fairly good summary of the entire decade. And of course, being sunken, the pit collected everything. Dropped snacks, spilled drinks, small toys, the occasional guest who descended a little too enthusiastically. It was the lowest point in the room, which meant it was where all things eventually gravitated. A plush little basin of crumbs and cushions and trapped socializers. Cleaning it meant climbing down into it and confronting whatever the household had accumulated at the bottom. Practicality was never the point. Safety was certainly never the point. The point was style, closeness, and the bold architectural statement that your living room was interesting enough to have terrain. For a while, having a conversation pit was the height of sophistication, proof that your home was modern, social, and unafraid of a little structural drama. Ever tried to leave a party gracefully when doing so requires physically climbing out of a hole in the living room floor? You cannot. You rise from the cushions, you ascend the little steps, and everyone watches your slow, deliberate exit from the pit, and any illusion of a smooth goodbye is gone. So you climb up out of the pit and go to sit on the nearest proper couch instead, and the moment you make contact it greets you with a loud, unmistakable crinkle. You go to sit on the good couch and instantly regret it, because someone has covered it in a thick, clear plastic slipcover that crinkles loudly and sticks to the backs of your legs. This was a proud tradition. The nicest furniture in the house was sealed away under transparent plastic to protect it from spills, stains, sunlight, and the family who actually lived there. The result was a sofa that could never be enjoyed, only endured, hot in summer, cold in winter, and squeaky in all seasons. You were preserving the couch for a special occasion that would never arrive, sweating gently onto its plastic shell like a museum exhibit no one was allowed to touch. The logic, such as it was, made a kind of sense. Nice furniture was expensive and a good sofa was an investment, something a family saved up for and took great pride in. So naturally, to protect that investment, you sealed it inside a fitted cover of heavy clear plastic, shielding the precious fabric beneath from the grubby reality of daily life. The couch would stay pristine forever, its beautiful upholstery preserved in mint condition, visible but untouchable, like a butterfly pinned under glass. The experience of actually sitting on it, however, was a small trial. In the summer, the plastic grew hot and clammy, and the moment you sat down in shorts, your skin fused to the surface with a sound and sensation that no one enjoyed. Standing up again meant peeling yourself off with a slow, unwilling suction. In the winter, the plastic turned cold and clammy in the other direction, greeting you with a chill that no amount of body heat could fully overcome. There was no season in which the plastic couch was comfortable. It was uncomfortable year-round, out of principle, and the sound, every single movement produced a loud, unmistakable crinkle that echoed through the room. Shift your weight, crinkle. Cross your legs, crinkle. Try to settle in and get cozy, and the couch announced your every motion to the entire household with the enthusiasm of a bag of chips. Discreet napping was impossible. Sneaking a snack was impossible. The plastic told on you. The great irony, of course, was that the couch was being protected for a special occasion that somehow never came. The plastic was supposed to come off when important guests visited, or on a fine holiday, revealing the beautiful furniture beneath in all its glory. But the special day kept not arriving, and the plastic stayed on year after year, until it yellowed and cracked with age, having successfully protected a couch that no one was ever actually allowed to enjoy. It extended to other treasures too, the good lamps, the fancy chairs, sometimes even the carpet in the formal living room, all preserved under plastic or roped off behind an invisible line no child dared cross. There was often an entire room like this, the good room, kept perfect and unused, a shrine to a level of company that rarely materialized. The family lived in the den and worshipped the living room from a respectful distance. Ever tried to relax on a couch that squeaks and sticks and slowly cooks the backs of your knees? Relaxation is not on offer. You perch, you crinkle, you sweat, and you understand that this couch was never really for sitting. It was for looking at, and for protecting, and for one day, someday, being unveiled. So you peel yourself off the plastic with a sigh and a squeak, and you look for somewhere genuinely comfortable to sit. Your eyes fall on a floppy leather sack slumped in the corner, and you decide to take your chances. If the plastic couch was too formal, there was always the alternative in the corner. The beanbag chair, a floppy leather sack filled with thousands of tiny foam pellets that shifted and crunched with your every move. Sitting down was a gamble and standing up was a full workout, since the chair offered roughly the same support as a pile of dry leaves. Once you sank in, you were essentially part of the floor, and getting out again required a coordinated struggle that everyone in the room pretended not to watch. Over time, the seams gave way, releasing little foam beads across the shag carpet, where they would live, undisturbed, forever. The beanbag was the anti-furniture, the cool, casual rejection of everything the stiff, formal living room stood for. There was no frame, no structure, no rules. It was just a big, soft bag full of little beads that moulded itself to your body, or, more accurately, gave way beneath your body until you were sitting mostly on the floor with some beads for company. To a young person, it was the height of relaxed, groovy comfort. To anyone over a certain age, it looked like a beige boulder that had given up. Sitting down in one was an act of faith. You aimed your body at the sack, you committed, and you fell backward into it, hoping it would catch you rather than simply parting around you and depositing you on the carpet. If you landed well, the beads shifted and cradled you into a surprisingly cozy nest. If you landed poorly, you ended up in a strange half-folded position, wedged into the bag at an angle no chiropractor would endorse, slowly sinking further with every passing minute. Getting out was the real event, and everyone in the room secretly watched. Because the beanbag offered no leverage whatsoever, rising from it required a series of ungraceful manoeuvres, a roll, a lunge, a desperate reach for something stable to grab. You essentially had to fight your way out of a giant marshmallow, and there was no dignified way to do it. Elderly relatives approached the beanbag with visible dread, knowing that going down was easy, and coming back up was a public spectacle. Then there was the sound. That soft, constant crunching of thousands of little foam beads shifting inside the bag every time you so much as breathed. Settle in, and the chair whispered and rustled beneath you as it slowly compressed. Over time the beads packed down, and the plump, generous beanbag of last year deflated into a sad, flat puddle that required regular topping up, if you could find replacement beads, which you could not. And the great tragedy of the beanbag was its inevitable structural failure. The seams, stressed by years of people flinging themselves into it, eventually gave way, and when they did, the beanbag did not simply tear. It erupted, releasing a cascade of tiny static charged foam beads across the entire room. Those beads clung to everything, rolled into every corner, and burrowed deep into the shag carpet, where the vacuum could not reach them. You would be finding stray beanbag beads in that carpet for years, little foam ghosts of a chair long gone. Ever tried to sit in a beanbag while holding a full cup of coffee, maintaining your balance as the chair slowly rearranges itself beneath you? It is a delicate operation. One wrong shift and the beads redistribute, tipping you sideways, and the coffee makes its own decision about where it wants to be. So you crunch and struggle your way back up out of the beanbag, dust a stray foam bead off your sleeve, and as the evening light fades, the room begins to glow. Not from anything sensible, but from a lamp on the shelf that has slowly started to bubble. As evening settles in, the room begins to glow, and not from anything as simple as a normal light. On the shelf, a lava lamp slowly heats up, sending fat blobs of coloured wax drifting up and down in hypnotic slow motion, doing absolutely nothing useful and doing it beautifully. Around the house the lighting is dim, warm and deeply orange, thanks to amber glass fixtures and low wattage bulbs that make everything look like a sunset viewed through weak tea. Nobody in this decade wanted a well-lit room. They wanted atmosphere, and atmosphere meant squinting slightly at all times while a lamp quietly bubbled beside you like a very relaxed volcano. The lava lamp was a genuine marvel of doing nothing impressively. Inside a tall glass bottle sat a special coloured wax suspended in liquid, warmed by a small bulb in the base. As the wax heated, it rose in slow, wobbling blobs to the top, cooled and sank lazily back down, over and over, in an endless, mesmerizing loop. It was not a light so much as a very slow-moving pet, a thing to stare at, to zone out in front of, to watch for far longer than any reasonable person should. It served no purpose beyond being fascinating, and that was entirely the point. You could not rush it either. When you first switched it on, the wax sat in a stubborn lump at the bottom, and you had to wait, sometimes for the better part of an hour, for it to warm up enough to start its slow dance. Patience was required. The lava lamp did not perform on demand. It performed when it was good and ready, in its own time, which added to its strange, unhurried charm. The rest of the household lighting followed the same philosophy of moody dimness. This was not a decade of bright, clean, practical light, Fixtures glowed in warm amber tones, shades were thick and often orange or gold, and bulbs were kept low and cosy. The overall effect was a home bathed in a perpetual golden dusk, warm and atmospheric and just barely bright enough to read by, if you held the book close and did not mind the strain. Hanging lamps were everywhere, especially the great swag lamp, a large globe or dome that hung from a chain looped across the ceiling, plugged into the wall, casting a pool of soft light over the seating below. There were rise and fall lamps over the dining table, and coloured glass fixtures that threw warm patches of amber and gold across the walls. Everything was designed to be soft, warm, and flattering, and nothing was designed to actually illuminate a room to a functional level. There was a certain wisdom to it, in fairness. Harsh overhead light is unflattering and clinical, and the warm, dim glow of the 1970s home was undeniably cosy. It hid the dust, it softened the aggressive wallpaper, it made every gathering feel intimate and relaxed. The house was less lit than it was gently suggested, a warm, shadowy space where the details blurred and the lava lamp bubbled in the corner like a nightlight for adults. Ever tried to find something small you dropped in a room lit entirely by mood lighting and a bubbling wax lamp? You cannot. You grope around in the amber gloom, you feel along the shag carpet, and eventually you give up and wait until morning, when the natural light will reveal whatever the golden dusk had hidden. So you sit in the warm, bubbling glow, and your eye drifts to the corner of the room, where a great knotted web of rope and beads hangs from the ceiling, gently swaying in the breeze from the fan. Look toward the corner and you will find it dangling there, a great knotted web of rope, tassels and wooden beads, twisted by hand into something between an art piece and a hammock for a plant. This is macrame, and in the 1970s it was everywhere. Plant holders swung from the ceiling, owls made of string watched you from the walls, and entire curtains were woven from knotted cord by someone who clearly had a long winter and a lot of yarn. It gathered dust, it swayed gently in the breeze from the fan, and it added to every room a warm, earthy sense that a very calm person lived here and possibly owned a loom. Macrame was, at its heart, the ancient craft of tying knots and calling it décor, and the decade embraced it with total devotion. Armed with nothing but lengths of rough natural cord and a great deal of patience, people knotted their way through the evenings, producing an endless supply of hanging plant holders, wall hangings and dangling ornaments to fill the home. It was handmade, it was earthy, it was natural, and it fit perfectly with the decade's love of warm tones and organic textures. The hanging plant holder was the undisputed star. A web of knotted cord cradled a pot of trailing greenery and hung it from the ceiling or a wall bracket, suspending the plant in mid-air like a leafy chandelier. Every home had several, dangling in front of windows, swaying gently in doorways, brushing against the heads of taller guests who walked into them and set them swinging. They combined two of the decade's great loves, knotted rope and houseplants, into a single, dangling package. And then there was the owl. For reasons that history has never fully explained, the macrame owl became an icon of the era, a wall hanging shaped like a wide-eyed bird, its body knotted from cord, its eyes made from large wooden beads, staring out at the room with an expression of permanent mild concern. These owls hung on walls across the nation, and no one could quite say why, only that a home without at least one knotted owl felt somehow incomplete. The craft did not stop there. Macrame became curtains, room dividers, plant hangers, belts, and vast complicated wall hangings that stretched from ceiling to floor in elaborate patterns of knots and beads and fringe. Some were genuinely beautiful, intricate works of real skill. Others were the ambitious first attempts of someone who had bought a how-to book and a lot of cord, and produce something that looked less like art and more like a rope that had gotten into serious trouble. What all of it shared was that handmade, homespun quality that the decade adored. In an age increasingly full of plastic and machines, macrame was warm, natural and personal, made by human hands out of simple materials. It softened the room, added texture, and paired perfectly with the wood tones, the earthy colours, and the indoor jungle of plants that filled every corner of the home. Ever tried to walk through a doorway hung with a macrame curtain while carrying something in both hands? The knotted cords part reluctantly, catch on your shoulders, and drape themselves across your face, and you emerge on the other side slightly tangled, having lost a brief and dignified battle with a curtain made of the rope. So you duck under the swaying knots, and following the trail of dangling plant holders, you find yourself surrounded on all sides by green, because this house is not merely decorated with plants. It is, quietly, being overtaken by them. Suspended in all that macrame and crowding every windowsill and shelf is the greenery, because the 1970s home was less a house and more a lightly managed rainforest. Spider plants trailed from hanging baskets, ferns exploded from macrame slings, and a rubber plant in the corner slowly plotted to take over the room. Every flat surface held a pot of something leafy, and the goal was to bring the outdoors in until the line between living room and greenhouse quietly blurred. You would water them, mist them, talk to them if the mood struck, and occasionally lose a small object into their soil, never to be recovered. It was cosy. It was also faintly humid. The decade fell hard for houseplants, and it did not do so halfway. Bringing nature indoors became a central obsession, and homes filled up with greenery until they resembled botanical gardens with furniture. The more plants, the better, and the ideal living room dripped with foliage from every shelf, corner, and hanging hook. A lush green backdrop to all that brown panelling and gold shag. Certain plants became true stars of the era. The spider plant with its long arching leaves and little baby plantlets dangling on stems was practically the mascot of the decade, hanging in nearly every home, spilling out of its pot in a cascade of green. The rubber plant stood tall and glossy in the corner. Ferns burst from hanging baskets, and climbing up walls and along shelves went the pothos and the philodendron, trailing their leaves everywhere, slowly extending their reach across the room like something out of a very slow-motion adventure film. Caring for this indoor jungle became a genuine hobby, complete with rituals. There was watering, of course, and misting the leaves with a spray bottle to keep the air humid, and turning the pot so every side got its share of light. Dedicated plant parents talked to their plants, played music for them, and monitored their leaves with the anxious attention of someone caring for a temperamental pet. A drooping fern was a personal failure. A new leaf was a small triumph worth mentioning to guests. The plant served a real decorative purpose, softening the hard edges of the room and adding life and colour to the warm earthy palette. Trailing greenery draped over the tops of the wood panelling. Tall plants filled the awkward empty corners. Hanging plants dangled in front of the windows, filtering the light through their leaves. The effect was undeniably cosy. A warm green sanctuary that felt alive and lush and connected to the natural world, even in the middle of a suburban living room. Of course, an indoor jungle came with indoor jungle problems. The soil dropped bits of dirt onto the shag carpet below. The trailing vines caught on passing shoulders. Overwatered pots leaked onto shelves, and forgotten plants quietly died in the corners while their owners insisted they were merely resting. And any small object that fell into a large pot, a dropped earring, a lost coin, a wayward toy, was simply gone, absorbed into the soil of the jungle, a permanent offering to the greenery. Ever tried to water a hanging plant suspended well above your head, without a single drop escaping onto the floor below? You cannot. You reach up, you tip the watering can, and a small trickle inevitably finds its way down the outside of the pot and onto the carpet, or onto you, baptizing you gently in the name of indoor gardening. So you brush a bit of stray potting soil from your shoulder and step past the greenery toward the fireplace, reaching out to steady yourself against the rugged stone wall. And that is when you notice the stone is not stone at all. By now you have started to notice a pattern, because that fireplace over there is not made of real stone, and that accent wall is not made of real brick. They are made of moulded plastic and printed panels, glued on to look rugged and rustic without any of the weight, cost or authenticity of the real thing. The 1970s loved a fake surface the way some people love a good magic trick. Faux brick, faux stone, faux wood beams that were actually hollow and light as a lunchbox. From across the room it looked convincing. Up close, it looked like exactly what it was, a house cheerfully cosplaying as a medieval tavern. The decade had discovered that you could imitate almost any expensive natural material for a fraction of the price, and it dove into this discovery with tremendous enthusiasm and very little restraint. Why pay for real brick, with its weight and its cost and its skilled labour, when you could buy lightweight panels printed and moulded to look like brick and simply glue them to the wall in an afternoon? Why haul real stone when a sheet of moulded plastic could give you the rugged look of a mountain lodge without the hernia? The faux brick accent wall became a fixture of the era, a stretch of wall covered in panels designed to resemble red brick, often behind the stove in the kitchen or around the fireplace in the living room. It gave the room a cosy, rustic farmhouse feeling, or at least the general idea of one. Up close, the illusion tended to fall apart, revealing the too regular pattern and the suspiciously smooth texture of a material that had never seen a kiln. But from the couch, in the dim amber mood lighting, it looked almost real, and almost real was good enough. Fake stone got the same treatment, cladding fireplaces and entryway walls in moulded panels that mimicked rugged rock. These panels were astonishingly light, so light that a wall of imposing stone could be lifted with one hand, which rather undercut the whole rugged mountain lodge effect. Knock on it, and it sounded hollow. Lean on it, and it flexed. But it looked the part, and looking the part was the entire ambition. Then there were the ceiling beams, those heavy dark timbers that crossed the ceiling to give a room a sturdy, rustic, old-world character. Except they were not timbers at all. They were hollow shells of moulded foam or lightweight material, tacked to the ceiling, giving all the visual weight of solid oak with none of the actual weight, or the actual oak. A grown adult could lift one with a finger. It was structural drama with no structure and no drama, just appearance. The whole approach captured something essential about the decade. This was not a home ashamed of its imitations. It embraced them, celebrated them, glued them proudly to every available surface. Real materials were expensive and heavy and difficult. Fake ones were cheap, light, and easy, and they let an ordinary suburban house pretend, convincingly enough, to be a rustic lodge, a cosy cottage, or a charming old tavern, all without leaving the comfort of the modern age. Ever tried to hang a heavy picture on a wall of fake brick, only to discover the panel behind it is hollow plastic with nothing solid to hold a nail? You cannot. The nail punches straight through into the void behind, and you're left with a small hole in a wall that was only ever pretending to be a wall in the first place. So you take your hand off the hollow stone, faintly disappointed and faintly impressed, and you wander toward the corner of the room where the real social action happens. There, tucked against the wall, is a padded little counter lined with bottles and glasses, and it is time to talk about the home bar. Every self-respecting home in this decade came equipped with a wet bar, a dedicated little corner outfitted with a padded counter, a tiny sink, a shelf of mismatched glasses, and enough bottles to open a modest tavern. Here the man of the house would play bartender for guests, mixing drinks with names that have not aged well, garnished with maraschino cherries the colour of a warning sign. There were swivel stools, novelty cocktail napkins, and a decorative sign making a joke you've heard before. It was the social heart of the party, a stage for a grown adult to pretend, quite seriously, that his basement was a nightclub. The wet bar earned its name from the little sink tucked into the counter, the feature that separated the serious host from the amateur. A dry bar was just a cabinet with bottles. A wet bar had plumbing, which meant you could rinse a glass, add water to a drink, and generally operate like a professional, all without leaving your post. It was a small convenience that felt enormously sophisticated, and it turned a corner of the den into a genuine command centre of hospitality. The counter itself was a proud thing, padded and upholstered along the front edge, often wrapped in tufted vinyl the colour of a bad decision, with a row of matching swivel stools bolted in front of it. Guests perched on these stools, spun around slowly and watched the host perform. Behind the bar hung the essential accessories, the glass racks, the little shelves of liquor bottles, and inevitably a mirror to make the modest collection of spirits look twice as impressive as it actually was. And the host took the role seriously. Mixing drinks was a performance, and a good bartender had his signature cocktails, his special techniques, and his patter ready for company. The drinks of the era were sweet, colourful, and heavily garnished, poured into an assortment of glasses that rarely matched and served with a flourish. There was always a jar of maraschino cherries glowing an unnatural red, a bottle of something for the ladies, and a stronger something for the gentlemen, and a great deal of confident stirring. The decoration completed the fantasy. The home bar was where a man could express his personality, which usually meant a collection of novelty items, a decorative sign bearing a well-worn joke about drinking, a set of coasters shaped like something amusing, and cocktail napkins printed with cartoons. There might be a little neon sign, a string of lights, or a piece of art that would not have been welcome anywhere else in the house. The bar was his domain, and he decorated it like a tiny personal nightclub. The whole thing was a stage set for the golden age of home entertaining. This was a decade that loved a party at home, and the wet bar was where those parties came alive. Guests gathered around it, the host held court behind it, and for a few hours a suburban basement transformed into a glamorous lounge, complete with drinks, music from the hi-fi, and the warm amber glow of the mood lighting reflecting off all those bottles. Ever tried to look sophisticated perched on a swivel stool that rotates freely the moment you shift your weight? You cannot. You reach for your drink, the stool spins, and you find yourself slowly rotating away from the bar mid-conversation, forced to paddle yourself back around with one foot while maintaining an air of total dignity. So you spin yourself off the stool, drink in hand, and follow the sound of the party downstairs, descending into the great panelled kingdom beneath the house where the real entertaining happens. Downstairs, past the bar, lies the rec room, the great underground kingdom of the 1970s household. This was the basement transformed, with more wood panelling, more shag carpet, and a drop ceiling made of flimsy tiles that sagged suspiciously in the corners. Here you might find a pool table, a dartboard, a card table, and furniture that had been retired from the rooms above but was not quite dead yet. It was where the kids were sent, where the parties migrated, and where the smell of the entire decade seemed to gather and settle. Slightly damp, slightly dim, and wall-to-wall brown, the rec room was the beating, panelled heart of the home. The rec room, short for recreation room, was the answer to a simple question: what do you do with a basement? And the decade answered with tremendous enthusiasm. You panelled the concrete walls in that familiar fake wood, you laid down shag carpet or indoor-outdoor carpet over the cold floor. You installed a drop ceiling to hide the pipes, and suddenly your damp underground storage space became the most used room in the entire house. The drop ceiling deserves a mention because it was a defining feature and a constant source of low-grade anxiety. It was made of lightweight tiles resting in a metal grid suspended below the real ceiling, hiding all the ugly pipes and wires above. It was practical, it was cheap, and it sagged. Over time the tiles yellowed, water stains bloomed across them in mysterious continents, and the occasional tile went missing entirely, leaving a dark rectangular gap that everyone agreed to ignore. The furniture down here was a museum of the family's past. Nothing in a rec room was new. This was where furniture went to retire, the old couch replaced upstairs, the chair that had seen better days, the coffee table with the water rings. It all migrated down to the basement for a comfortable second life, mismatched and worn and utterly unbothered about it. The rec room did not need to impress anyone. It just needed to hold people, and it held a lot of activity. This was the room for games, for hobbies, for the pool table or the ping-pong table that took up most of the floor, for the dartboard mounted on the panelling with a scattering of holes around it from errant throws. It was where the card games happened, where the kids played, where the teenagers gathered, and where the parties eventually drifted once the wet bar upstairs had done its work. It was the room where the rules relaxed. There was, however, no escaping the fundamental basement nature of the place. No matter how much panelling and carpet you added, it was still underground, which meant it was slightly cool, slightly damp, and possessed of a particular smell, a mixture of concrete, carpet, old furniture, and the ghost of every gathering that had ever happened down there. It was not unpleasant exactly. It was just unmistakably, permanently the smell of the rec room. Ever tried to line up a serious pool shot in a basement where the drop ceiling hangs just low enough that your cue stick clips a tile on the backswing? You cannot. You draw back, you clip the ceiling, a little shower of tile dust drifts down onto the felt, and your carefully planned shot goes sailing off in a direction you did not intend. So you rack up your final game, and as the evening wears on, the party gathers around the table for dinner, where a small pot is already bubbling over an open flame, and everyone is being handed a long fork. Dinner is served, and tonight, like so many nights, it involves fondue. In the centre of the table sits a small pot, bubbling over a tiny flame, filled with molten cheese, hot oil, or melted chocolate, and everyone has been handed a long fork and a set of unspoken rules. You spear a cube of bread, dip it into the communal pot, and try very hard not to lose it in the depths, because if you do, tradition demands an embarrassing forfeit. It was social, it was interactive, and it was a mild fire hazard performed at the dinner table. For one glorious stretch of the decade, dinner was not a meal. It was a group activity with a flame. The fondue set was one of the most popular gifts of the era, which meant that nearly every household owned one, usually received at a wedding and displayed with pride. It consisted of a pot, called a fondue pot, that sat on a little stand above a small burner, keeping its contents hot and molten throughout the meal. Around it came a set of long, colour-tipped forks, one for each guest, so everyone could reach into the communal pot from their seat without a duel breaking out. The classic version was cheese fondue, a pot of melted cheese kept warm and stringy, into which you dipped cubes of bread. There was chocolate fondue for dessert, a pot of warm melted chocolate for dipping fruit and cake, which was as delightful as it was messy. And then there was the version involving a pot of hot oil, into which guests dipped raw meat to cook it at the table, an activity that combined dinner with a genuine and ever-present risk of burns. Hosting fondue was, in a small way, an act of bravery. The real charm of fondue was that it was social. Everyone gathered around the same pot, reached in with their long forks, and shared the meal in a way that ordinary dinners did not encourage. It slowed everything down. You could not rush fondue. You dipped, You waited for your morsel to heat through, you chatted, you dipped again. A fondue dinner could stretch on for a leisurely, convivial hour or more, which was exactly the point in a decade that loved to entertain. There were rules too, and they were taken with a fond seriousness. The most sacred was the penalty for losing your food in the pot. If your cube of bread slipped off your fork and vanished into the communal cheese, tradition demanded a forfeit, and the forfeits were the stuff of legend, ranging from buying the next round of drinks to kissing the person next to you. It added a little gentle danger to the proceedings, a reason to concentrate on your dipping and a source of laughter when someone inevitably fumbled. Like so many things in the decade, fondue eventually faded, and the beloved fondue pot was quietly retired to the back of a cupboard, brought out less and less until it became a dusty relic of parties past. But for its moment, it was the height of fashionable entertaining, the centerpiece of countless dinner parties, a warm, bubbling, communal celebration of a decade that never met a meal it did not want to turn into an event. Ever tried to keep track of which long fork is yours when 6 people are dipping into the same pot from every direction? You cannot. The forks tangle, the colour coding is forgotten after the second drink, and you simply hope the one you pull out is the one you put in. So you finish the last of the fondue, wipe a string of cheese from your chin, and a voice suddenly crackles through the wall, summoning everyone from a little box mounted by the door. Mounted on the wall by the door is a curious little box with a speaker grill and a row of buttons, the home intercom system, allowing residents to broadcast their voice into any room of the house. In theory, it was the height of modern convenience, letting a parent summon children to dinner without the ancient effort of shouting up the stairs. In practice, it mostly produced bursts of static, muffled feedback, and the occasional accidental broadcast of a private conversation to the entire household. Some models even piped music through the walls, whether you wanted it or not. It was space age. It was futuristic. It was also, almost always, broken within a year. The home intercom was a proud symbol of modern living, installed with great excitement in newer and fancier homes. The idea was thrilling. A central control panel, usually in the kitchen, connected to little speaker units in every room, so a person could press a button and speak to anyone anywhere in the house. No shouting required. It promised to make the busy modern household run like a well-organized office, all coordinated through the magic of the intercom. The reality was somewhat less magical. The sound quality was, to put it kindly, terrible. Voices came through crackling and distorted, half swallowed by static, so that a simple message to come to dinner arrived as an urgent, garbled burst of noise that could mean almost anything. Guests jumped when it suddenly squawked to life on the wall. Children learned to interpret the muffled broadcast through experience, decoding the crackling summons like translators of a difficult foreign language. The feedback was its own special torment. Press the button while too close to another active speaker, and the system erupted into a piercing electronic squeal that echoed through the whole house and sent everyone scrambling to make it stop. Operating the intercom without triggering the shriek required a delicate touch and a bit of luck, and many a household simply learned to live with the occasional blast of feedback as the price of modern convenience. Then there were the accidental broadcasts, the source of countless small household dramas. Leave a button pressed by mistake, and a private conversation, a muttered complaint, or an argument would be transmitted live to every room in the house, to the horror of the speaker and the delight of everyone else. The intercom heard things it was never meant to hear and shared them generously. An eavesdropper wired directly into the walls. Many models came with a built-in radio or music feature, capable of piping tunes throughout the home from that central panel. It sounded wonderful in the brochure, music flowing gently through every room, but in practice it meant tinny, crackling audio drifting out of a small wall speaker, whether the occupants of that room wanted it or not. And like the rest of the system, This feature tended to work beautifully for a while, and then quietly give up, leaving a dead box on the wall as a monument to the future that once was. Ever tried to have a genuinely private conversation in a house wired with an intercom you're never quite sure is switched off? You cannot. You eye the little box on the wall with suspicion, you lower your voice, and you always wonder whether your words are being broadcast, crackling and clear, to a relative standing in the kitchen. So you eye the crackling box one last time and run your hand along the hallway wall as you pass, and you feel it, rough and swirled and sharp beneath your fingers, because in this house even the walls have texture. Run your hand along the wall in the hallway and you will feel it. The deliberate roughness of textured plaster swirled and swept into peaks and ridges like the surface of a stormy sea. This was the fashionable finish, sometimes sprayed on thick, sometimes troweled by hand into elaborate patterns meant to evoke a rustic Spanish villa, at least in spirit. It caught the dim amber light dramatically and gave every surface a shadowy depth. It also caught dust, snagged sweaters, and scraped the skin off any elbow that got too close. You could not lean on these walls. You could only admire them cautiously, from a safe and unabrasive distance. The smooth wall was, in the eyes of the decade, a boring wall, and so texture was applied with great enthusiasm. Plaster was troweled, swirled, stippled, and sprayed onto walls and ceilings to create rugged, dimensional surfaces full of peaks and valleys. The look was meant to be warm, earthy, and handcrafted, evoking the rustic charm of an old-world villa, a Spanish hacienda, or a cozy Mediterranean cottage, and it fit perfectly with the decade's love of warm tones and natural textures. The techniques had a certain artistry to them. A skilled hand could swirl the plaster into elegant fan shapes, sweep it into gentle waves, or stipple it into a fine rough texture that softened the light. Combined with the amber mood lighting of the era, these textured walls cast subtle shadows and gave rooms a sense of depth and craftsmanship. Done well, it genuinely evoked the rustic elegance it was reaching for. Done less well, it evoked something closer to a plaster accident. Not every hand troweling texture onto a wall was a skilled one, and many rooms ended up with surfaces that were less elegant sweep and more chaotic scrape, sharp little points and ridges jutting out at random. These aggressive textures had a real bite to them, and they took a toll on anyone who came into contact with them, which in a house full of people was everyone. Because the great flaw of the textured wall was that it was, in a very literal sense, rough. Brush against it, and it caught your sleeve. Lean on it, and it pressed sharp little points into your shoulder. Run your bare arm along it, and it could genuinely scrape the skin, leaving you with a red mark and a new respect for the hostility of your own hallway. Children learned quickly not to drag their hands along the walls, and sweaters everywhere paid the price in pulled threads and snags. It was also a magnet for dust and an enemy of cleaning. All those little peaks and ridges collected dust and grime beautifully, and there was no easy way to wipe them clean. You could not run a cloth smoothly across a textured wall, and scrubbing risked damaging the finish. So the texture aged in place, gathering the fine grey film of years, impossible to fully clean and impossible to easily remove, another permanent feature that would outlast the fashion that created it. Ever tried to lean casually against a textured plaster wall at a party, striking a relaxed pose, only to feel the surface digging into your shoulder blade like a bed of tiny knives? You cannot hold the pose. You shift, you wince, you peel yourself off the wall, and you resolve to stand up straight for the rest of the evening. So you keep your arms carefully clear of the walls, and you take a slow breath through your nose, and immediately you understand the deepest, most inescapable truth about this house, which is that the entire place is quietly marinating in smoke. Take a deep breath and immediately regret it. because the entire house is gently marinated in cigarette smoke. In the 1970s, people smoked indoors freely, at the dinner table, on the plastic-covered couch, and directly beneath the flammable wood panelling without a flicker of concern. Heavy glass ashtrays sat on every surface like little monuments, and the smoke drifted up into the popcorn ceiling and settled into the shag carpet, where it stayed for decades. The walls slowly turned a warm shade of yellow that no one quite noticed until they moved a picture frame. The house did not just look like the 1970s, it smelled like them, permanently. Smoking indoors was simply normal, so normal that no one gave it a second thought. People lit up in the living room, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, at the dinner table between courses. Guests were offered a cigarette the way they might be offered a drink, and a considerate host made sure there was an ashtray within easy reach of every seat in the house. The idea that smoke might be a problem indoors had not yet taken hold, and so the smoke went wherever the people went, which was everywhere. The ashtray was accordingly a genuine piece of decor, and it came in every form imaginable. There were heavy glass ones in amber and smoked colours, weighty enough to serve as a weapon. There were ornate ceramic ones, novelty ones shaped like animals or slogans, elegant standing ones on their own little pedestals beside the armchair. Ashtrays were displayed proudly on coffee tables, end tables, kitchen counters and bathroom shelves, filled and emptied as a routine part of keeping house. The smoke, of course, did not simply vanish. It rose, it drifted, and it settled into every soft and porous surface in the home. It sank into the shag carpet and lived there. It soaked into the curtains, the upholstery, the plastic couch cover, and the endless macrame. It drifted up and clung to the bumpy popcorn ceiling, which was practically designed to catch it. Over the years, the entire house absorbed the smoke like a sponge, storing it up in every fibre. And then there was the colour. Slowly, imperceptibly, over years, the smoke turned everything a warm shade of yellowish tan. The walls, the ceiling, the light fixtures, all of it gradually gained a nicotine-tinted patina so gradual that no one living in the house ever noticed. The only way to see it was to move something, a picture frame, a clock, a shelf, and discover the shocking bright rectangle of original colour hiding behind it, a little window into how the walls had looked before the years of smoke had their way. The smell was the most permanent legacy of all. It seeped so deeply into the bones of the house that it became part of the structure itself. Long after the smokers were gone, the smell lingered in the carpet, the panelling, the very drywall, an olfactory ghost that resisted every cleaning product and every open window. To strip it out entirely often meant tearing out the carpet, the curtains, and sometimes the walls, because the house had spent a decade breathing in smoke and had no intention of exhaling it. Ever tried to detect a smell you've been surrounded by every single day of your life? You cannot. To the people who lived there, the smoke smelled like nothing at all, like home, invisible and unremarkable, noticed only by visitors and by the yellow shadows behind the picture frames. So you crack a window for a bit of fresh air, and through it you catch sight of the driveway, where the true monument of the household sits gleaming under the streetlight, a car roughly the size of a small boat. Step out to the garage and behold the family car, a vehicle so enormous it has its own weather system. This is a genuine land yacht, long enough to require its own zip code, wrapped in chrome and painted in the same earthy tones as the house it belongs to. The interior is a vast plain of vinyl and fake wood grain, with bench seats wide enough to nap on, and a fuel appetite that borders on the mythical. The garage itself is less a parking space, and more a museum wing, packed with tools, bikes, and boxes of things nobody will ever open again. In this decade, bigger was always better, and the driveway proved it daily. The American car of the era was a magnificent, excessive thing, built on the firm principle that more was always better. These were enormous vehicles, long and wide and heavy, with vast hoods, sprawling trunks, and enough steel in them to build a small bridge. They floated down the road on soft suspension, gliding rather than driving, which is exactly how they earned the affectionate nickname of the land yacht. Piloting one felt less like driving and more like captaining a ship across a sea of asphalt. The interior matched the ambition of the exterior. Inside was a wide-open expanse of vinyl or velour, with long bench seats front and back rather than individual bucket seats, offering enough room to seat a small crowd or, for the youngest passengers, to lie down entirely during a long trip. And true to the decade, the dashboard and door panels were decorated with fake wood grain panelling, bringing that beloved faux timber look right into the car, so you could enjoy the same rustic lodge aesthetic on the highway as you did in your living room. The colours, too, echoed the home. Cars came in the same warm, earthy palette that dominated everything else: deep browns, harvest golds, avocado greens and burnt oranges, sometimes with a contrasting vinyl roof and a great deal of gleaming chrome trim. The family car and the family home were, in a very real sense, colour-coordinated, two expressions of the same decade-wide devotion to the tones of autumn and soup. The fuel appetite of these machines was legendary, and largely unquestioned until the decade delivered a rude surprise in the form of fuel shortages and long lines at the gas station. Suddenly the enormous thirsty land yacht looked less like a symbol of prosperity and more like a liability, and the era of the ever bigger car began, slowly, to reach its limit. But for much of the decade, the size and the thirst were simply the price of magnificence. And then there was the garage itself, which fulfilled its actual purpose of housing the car only some of the time. More often, the garage evolved into a vast storage annex, filling steadily with tools, bicycles, lawn equipment, holiday decorations, and an ever-growing collection of boxes containing things no one could quite remember, but no one was willing to throw away. The car, ironically, frequently ended up parked in the driveway, exiled from the garage by the sheer accumulated clutter of the household. Ever tried to squeeze a car the size of a small yacht into a garage already packed to the ceiling with boxes, bikes, and a workbench? You cannot. You inch forward, you fold in the mirrors, you hold your breath, and eventually you accept defeat and leave the great land yacht sitting proudly in the driveway where it belongs. So you head back inside, out of the evening chill, and the moment you step through the door you feel it. A wave of perfectly controlled air, because this house has central heating and cooling, and that means there is a war being waged over a little box on the wall. Back inside, a quiet battle is raging, and its front line is the thermostat on the hallway wall. For the first time, central heating and central air conditioning are becoming common, which means the whole family can now argue about the temperature of the entire house at once, from a single dial. Someone is always too hot, someone is always too cold, and someone has secretly adjusted the setting while pretending they did not. The vents hum, the air blows, and the electricity bill climbs quietly in the background. It was a marvel of comfort and convenience, and it introduced a brand new form of household conflict that continues to this very day. Central air conditioning was a genuine luxury on the rise, and its spread changed home life dramatically. Where earlier generations had sweated through the summer with open windows and a single labouring fan, the modern home could now be cooled evenly throughout. The temperature held at a steady, blissful, comfortable level, regardless of the weather outside. Cool air flowed silently from vents in every room, and for the first time summer indoors could be pleasant rather than merely survivable. The heart of this new comfort was the thermostat, that unassuming little dial mounted on the wall, usually in the hallway, where it controlled the climate of the entire house. It was a marvel of technology, a single control point governing the temperature of every room at once. And therein, of course, lay the problem. because a single control point for a house full of people with different opinions about temperature was a recipe for endless, low-grade conflict. The thermostat wars were a new and enduring feature of family life. One person ran hot and wanted it cooler. Another ran cold and wanted it warmer. A third worried about the cost and wanted it set to barely functional at all. And so, the dial became a contested territory, nudged up a degree by one family member, secretly nudged back down by another, each adjustment made quietly and denied loudly. Nobody admitted to touching it, and yet somehow it was always mysteriously changing. There was also the matter of the vents and the fierce competition for the good spots in the house. The seat directly beneath a cooling vent was prime real estate on a hot day, and the chair positioned over a heating vent was equally prized in winter. Family members staked out these positions, defended them, and mourned when forced to give them up, all while the great climate control system hummed away in the background, indifferent to the human drama it had created. And humming away with it, quietly, relentlessly, was the electricity bill. All this glorious climate control came at a cost, and running the air conditioning through a long hot summer or the heat through a long cold winter added up. The person who worried about the bill was often the same person caught nudging the thermostat back toward a more economical setting, sparking the next round of the eternal war. Comfort had arrived, and it had brought a monthly invoice with it. Ever tried to secretly adjust a thermostat and return to your seat with a completely innocent expression, only to have someone immediately announce that the temperature has changed? You cannot get away with it. The house shifts by a single degree, and somehow everyone knows, and the eternal war rolls on to its next skirmish. So you leave the thermostat alone, wisely, and you wander into the kitchen for a snack, where the counter is crowded with an army of humming, whirring, single-purpose machines, each one promising to make your life easier. The kitchen, it turns out, is not done surprising you, because the 1970s was obsessed with gadgets, and this house has them all. There is an electric can opener the size of a small toaster, an avocado-coloured blender, and proudest of all, a trash compactor, a machine that crushes your garbage into a dense, ominous cube for reasons no one has ever fully explained. Every task that a human hand could do was now assigned to a heavy, humming appliance in a coordinating colour. They cluttered the counters, jammed constantly, and broke down in creative ways. But they were modern, they were electric, and owning them meant you were living, at long last, in the future. The decade fell deeply in love with the idea that any kitchen task, no matter how simple, could and should be handled by a dedicated machine. Opening a can, once accomplished with a small handheld tool in a few seconds, was now the job of a bulky electric can opener that sat permanently on the counter, whirring and grinding its way around the lid while you waited. It was slower than the old way. It took up space, and it required electricity, but it was electric, and electric meant modern. The counters filled up accordingly. There was the blender in its coordinating avocado or harvest gold, ready to whir up a milkshake or a questionable dip. There was the electric knife, a vibrating, buzzing blade for carving the holiday roast, an appliance that combined mild danger with genuine novelty. There were mixers, percolators, hot trays, and warming plates, each one a single-purpose machine claiming its own patch of counter real estate until the kitchen resembled a small appliance showroom. But the crown jewel, the proudest and most baffling gadget of them all, was the trash compactor. This was a large appliance built right into the kitchen cabinetry, whose entire purpose was to crush your garbage down into a dense, heavy brick. You filled it with trash, you activated it, and with a powerful mechanical groan it compressed everything into a compact cube, so that your bag of garbage, while now weighing roughly as much as a bowling ball, took up less space. Whether this was actually useful remained an open question that few dared to ask aloud. The appeal of all these gadgets was less about genuine necessity and more about the thrilling sense of living in the future. This was an age of technological optimism, and a kitchen full of humming electric machines was proof that a family had embraced modern living. Each new gadget promised convenience, efficiency, and a small taste of the space age, right there on the counter next to the avocado toaster. The reality, as always, was a bit messier. These machines cluttered the counters, jammed at inconvenient moments, and broke down in ways that were difficult and expensive to fix. The electric can opener gummed up, the trash compactor got stuck, the electric knife stopped buzzing, and slowly, one by one, many of these single-purpose marvels migrated to the back of the cupboard, replaced once again by the simple handheld tools they'd been invented to improve upon. Ever tried to justify owning a large, expensive machine whose only job is to make your garbage heavier and more compact? You cannot, not really. You press the button, the compactor groans, and you're left with a dense cube of trash and a lingering suspicion that the old way might have been fine all along. So you switch off the humming gadgets and the lights, and you take one last slow look around this glorious, baffling house before the day comes to its close. And so, as the lava lamp bubbles down and the smoke settles into the carpet, you take one last look around this glorious, baffling home. The brown, the gold, the green, the plastic, the panelling, the pit you keep tripping into. It should not work. By every rule of taste we cling to today, it should be a disaster. And yet there is something warm about it, something bold and cheerful and unafraid to be strange. This was a decade that looked at a house and decided it should be fun, comfortable, and completely committed to its own peculiar vision. It was loud, it was itchy, it was faintly on fire at all times, and somehow it was home. Think about the sheer confidence of it all. Every choice in this house was made without a shred of hesitation. The refrigerator was not a cautious beige, it was boldly, proudly avocado-green. The walls were not a safe white, they were wrapped in giant psychedelic flowers or clad in dark fake timber. The living room floor was not merely a floor, it dropped away into a sunken pit because someone decided that sitting slightly lower would improve everyone's conversation. Nothing about this home was timid, and there is something genuinely admirable in that. It was also undeniably a home built for people rather than for photographs. The shag carpet was impractical, but it was warm and soft underfoot. The plastic couch was uncomfortable, but it came from a genuine desire to protect something precious. The fondue pot was a mild fire hazard, but it brought the whole family and their guests around one table for an hour of shared, unhurried conversation. Beneath all the strange choices was a real warmth. A decade that wanted its homes to be cozy, social, and lived in. Much of what filled this house has since become a punchline. The avocado appliances, the carpeted bathroom, the wood panelling, the macrame owl staring down from the wall. We look back and laugh, and fair enough, because a great deal of it was objectively ridiculous. But every one of those choices was made by real people trying to make their homes comfortable and modern and pleasant, using the best ideas the moment had to offer. They were not trying to be dated. They were trying to be new. And that is the quiet lesson hiding inside all this brown and gold. Every era believes its taste is timeless, its choices sensible, its style the natural and permanent way that homes should look. The people who lovingly installed the shag carpet and the fake brick and the conversation pit were every bit as certain of their good taste as we are of ours. They were not being foolish. They were simply living fully in their own moment, exactly as we all do, decorating our lives with the things that feel right at the time. So somewhere out there, the ghost of this house still lingers, in the yellowed walls behind old picture frames, in the foam beanbag beads buried deep in carpets long since torn out, in the memory of a green refrigerator that hummed away for decades and refused to die. It was strange, it was loud, and it was gloriously, unapologetically itself. It was the home that time forgot, and yet it is remembered fondly by everyone who ever tripped into its conversation pit or peeled themselves off its plastic couch on a warm summer evening. Because in the end, a home is not really about good taste at all. It is about the people who lived there, the meals shared around the bubbling fondue pot, the evenings spent gathered around the great wooden television, the warmth and the laughter, and the life that filled every brown and golden room. And that, unlike the shag carpet, never really goes out of style. And so our little journey through the strangest house in history comes gently to its end. What a place it was! You woke on a sloshing waterbed, sank your feet into carpet deep enough to lose a small pet, and wandered through rooms wrapped in fake wood and giant psychedelic flowers. You met a refrigerator the colour of a smoothie no one ordered, a toilet wearing a fuzzy sweater, and a living room floor that simply dropped away into a cushioned pit. You peeled yourself off a plastic couch, struggled out of a beanbag, and watched a lamp full of wax bubble quietly in the corner, doing absolutely nothing, beautifully. It was loud, it was itchy, it was faintly on fire at all times, and somehow it was wonderful. Because behind every avocado appliance and every knotted macrame owl were real people, trying to make their homes warm, modern, and welcoming with the best ideas their moment had to offer. They gathered around bubbling fondue pots. They crowded in front of one enormous wooden television. They filled their rooms with plants and music and each other, and they did it all with a confidence we can only admire. So tonight, as you drift off in your own quiet home, with its sensible colours and its uncarpeted bathroom and its refrigerator that is probably just white, spare a warm thought for that gloriously bizarre decade. It reminds us that every era believes its taste is timeless, and that a home was never really about good taste at all. It was about the people, the warmth, and the life that filled every brown and golden room. Rest easy now. Let your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slow, and your mind settle softly into sleep. Good night.